The British Prime Minister has called for an investigation into whether the Guardian newspaper broke the law by publishing Edward Snowden leaks that sent shockwaves about American surveillance worldwide. A parliamentary committee is now looking into it. With more on why David Cameron's gunning for the Guardian, here's our London correspondent, Laura Smith.
He launched what can only be described as a rounded attack on the Guardian newspaper, really. He essentially called them hypocrites, or at least guilty of double standards. He says that the Guardian, on the one hand, exposed the scandal that was phone hacking, and then on the other hand, then themselves went ahead and published secrets themselves, which had been stolen in turn from the National Security Agency. He also said that the Guardian publishing the leaks that came from Edward Snowden had damaged national security. And what's more, that the Guardian itself admitted that they had. Let's hear what he said about that.
What has happened has damaged national security, and in many ways the Guardian themselves admitted that when they agreed, when asked politely by my National Security Advisor and Cabinet Secretary to destroy the files they had, they went ahead and destroyed those files. So they know that what they're dealing with is dangerous for national security. I think it's up to select committees in this House if they want to examine this issue and make further recommendations.
Asked politely by my National Security Advisor. That's my favourite bit of that. The Guardian, of course, we asked them for a statement, and they strenuously disagreed with what David Cameron said. They issued us a statement. They said that they agreed to destroy the files because they came under immense pressure from the government. They were threatened with the full force of the law, with this thing that's called prior restraint, which is very, very rarely used here in the UK and, according to them, unthinkable in the US.
Well, now we can get a reaction from British investigative journalist Tony Gosling. Tony, thank you so much for joining us here on RT. Well, we know that it's been a while since The Guardian started publishing Snowden's revelations, but why the high-profile investigation into this now? What do you read into the timing?
Well, I think David Cameron gets 10 out of 10 for brazen cheek. He's saying, of course, that The Guardian is, by these revelations through Snowden and Greenwald, are a threat to national security, but he hasn't cited a single instance of any kind of threat to national security. I think what we've got here is a terrible problem of a total lack of oversight of our intelligence services, not just GCHQ, but MI5 and MI6 as well. Few people understand how that works. I mean, we've got in this country something called the Joint Intelligence Committee, which is actually an unelected bunch of mandarins that actually manage these organisations, but they're overseen by the Intelligence and Security Committee. And you know, how frightening would it be if the Intelligence and Security Committee was overseen by a former Conservative Defence Minister who was also a consultant to a company that was involved in military aerospace, in missile systems, in satellites and electronic warfare? Well, I'm afraid that's the case. So Malcolm Rifkin is working with this company, LEK Consulting, that does all this kind of work with the military. So I think the obvious problem here is nothing to do with the system of oversight, it's the people that need to be removed. A former Tory, for example, Sir Francis Richards, who is a former director of GCHQ, he said it was a bad idea for a former Tory Defence Secretary to be running this organisation, and I would say doubly if he's also working with the defence industry. This is a crazy concept. We've also had Nick Brown, the former Labour MP and Defence Minister, suggesting anyway, that the laws that they were attempting to pass earlier this year and end of last year, the so-called Snoopers Charter, all that was doing was an attempt to legalise criminal activity by GCHQ. That sort of criminal activity is, in fact, listening into and surveillance of privileged lawyer-client communications, that kind of thing.
Tony,
so
what do you
I think
make
what we've got is a complete failure in oversight.
What do you make of David Cameron's accusations? I mean, he was accusing The Guardian of double standards. How fair is that? I mean, when the root of the problem is, defending privacy, and this is what The Guardian was, in fact, speaking about by publishing Snowden's revelations.
Well, I think he's almost declaring war on investigative journalism, if that's the case. I mean, we've seen all sorts of threats, legal threats, other threats, unspecified threats to Glenn Greenwald and the rest. And also we've had a former government minister, Chris Huhne, recently come out, who's been ejected from the government saying that ministers who are overseeing this, actually the Cabinet and the National Security Committee, were told nothing about these security programmes, PRISM and the rest. And so what we've got is we've got a national security state that's completely out of control. And what Cameron needs to do is to side with the good guys, side with the angels, and actually to make sure that we've got people who are looking after the public interest who are overseeing these organisations. And his attack on The Guardian is absolutely despicable, and he should make sure that he's making sure that the British public are being protected by these people, and they're not in league with the defence industry, because the defence industry makes a lot of money out of war, and so we've got to make sure that that never happens. So that this oversight
Tony,
business has got to be sorted out once and for all.
We have very little time left, but very briefly, if you can, what's next then for the investigative journalist after all this, in your opinion?
Well, of course, what this has is a massive chilling effect on investigative journalism. By focusing on The Guardian and by trying to make them account for what they're doing, I think that will be absolutely no problem for The Guardian to do. But what it does is it actually reduces the amount of investigative journalism that's going on in the coverage, and it has a sort of self-censorship effect. A lot of journalists think, well, maybe I shouldn't do that story today because there may be legal problems, there may be the government leaning on me, and that's an appalling state of affairs. We've also got government regulation of the press coming along in Britain at the same time as all this, so it does seem that the press is being squeezed, particularly the left-wing press, by the government, and it's time to get the Tories out of the BBC. We've got a former Tory, Chris Patton, running the BBC, and out of GCHQ and the security services, because it starts to look like these people are actually simply there to do the government's bidding, and
Tony,
not to do proper oversight for the public.
Thank you very much for sharing this with us. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, talking to us from the UK.